configured functions. They're written by programmers like us. So even you can write your own library functions, and you can even use them inside your codes. So this essentially looks something like this, the printf function. So you can see that it has got a name, and it's followed by parenthesis. Then again, because it's a complete sentence, or it's a complete statement in programming's perspective, that's why we're providing a semicolon in here. So this semicolon will be telling the compiler that this is a complete statement. So if we do not provide that semicolon, the compiler will actually read this entire thing to be a complete statement, which is a mistake, which is a syntax error in this context. So if we build that, we can even see that. So you can see that on line 5, error expected. On line 4, error too few arguments to function printf. So we need to provide an argument, but first of all, it's also telling us that it has got two printf functions in one statement, which is actually a syntax error. So it's something like if we forget to provide a full stop, if we forget to provide a comma, if we forget to provide an exclamation mark when you write a complete paragraph in your English essay, suppose. Just for the sake of this example, I'm taking an analogy of the English essay. Now, this printf function was defined by someone else like us. It was defined by another programmer. So that programmer would have found out that people might need to print out something on their console, on their terminals, or on their command prompts. So they need to have an action. Now the action will go back to the compiler, and it will tell the compiler that, Mr. Compiler, you need to take this string like this string, my name is Nafis Ahmed. So you need to take this string and you need to print that out on the console. So this is defined. This is an action. It's an action towards the compiler. So a programmer like us, he defined an action that will print out something on the screen. So you will. I'm also saying that this entire thing is a function, and this too is yet another function. But the main difference you'll be able to see is that it has got a body. This main function has got a body, but this one hasn't got a body. It's just the function calling. We are just calling in the function. Now that library file that we included earlier, this library file called stdio.h, which is standard input and output.header file. So this header file has got the body for this printf function. Now this body, as I already told you, it's defining the features, it's defining the functionality for that specific function, it's defining the actions for that specific function. This part is only the name. We're going to look at what we can do inside this parenthesis at a later chapter, but just for this tutorial, let's consider this to be just the name. It's only the name. Now, every human being has some type of name through which we can understand who it is. So a function also needs to have a name. But using this curly braces, we are defining a block. Inside that block, we're defining the actions. So for this printf function, we're just calling it by name in here, because inside this library file, someone else already defined a body which consisted of the actions for this printf function. Inside that body, it had got all the functionality to print out something on our consoles. So whenever we call a function, we just use their name followed by this semicolon to make this a complete statement. Now this when we talk about this main function, it's also a function, yeah, but because it's the heart of the program, it's responsible for executing your program, the context for this one is different, because it's an independent function. It does not require any library support like this printf function. This printf function is taking the support from this standard input and output header file, but this main function does not require any library support. It will always need to have something. It will always need to have a block whenever you try to write your code in C programming. So we'll be talking about functions in a later chapter, so it's just for the idea, it's just for this tutorial which you need to understand for this for the timing. Now if you compile this, if you build this part, it's telling you that it requires an argument. Now this part is an argument. You can even write another one in here. So let's write something like this is an argument. So whatever you write inside this double quotation marks, this starting double quotation mark and the ending double quotation mark, this will get printed on our browser. You might be wondering that we are just printing out sentences, English sentences, or we're just printing out strings. Now you might be wondering, why are we just going for strings, or why are we just printing out a sentence? So if you want, you can even go for printing out numbers. Now when we look at variables in the next chapter, we're going to look how to plug in two separate expressions together using just this printf function. But we have already seen one of the feature of printf function. Now to print out a number on our browser, we can do two things. One, let's take the first example, and let's take the first option. So we can print out something like this is number 1. So we can do this. Let's save this. Let's build this. Perhaps let's run this. So okay, I can erase this off. Okay. Okay, now let's run this. Now let's run this part. Okay, this is now telling you that you have printed. This is telling you that you have printed out a number 1. Now this example isn't very helpful in a way that, suppose you want to change this number, do you change that manually like this? Do you just go for printing out 2, and then if you want to write something like 100, do you do that? Yeah, we can do that, but there is a better way to do that. So suppose you want to print out something like an expression. So an expression is something like a phrase in English. If we take if we try to take an analogy, or if we try to use an example from the English language. So a phrase is somewhat like, I have already shown you one example, like I've actually shown you the example of using a sentence. So let's create that sentence again. This is about learning C programming. Now in here we have a complete sentence, and in here we have a complete statement. So in a human language like the English language, we call this a sentence, because we can understand that by looking at the full stop, and we can also tell that by looking at the first word, which has a capital letter for its first letter, which has a capital letter for its first letter. And what am I saying? it has got, there are two things. First is the capital letter at the beginning and the full stop at the end. Now similarly, if we move on to a programming language, we can tell that by looking at the semicolon. So this marks the end of a statement. Now what if we want to use a phrase? A phrase could be something like this. So generally in English, this can be regarded to be as a phrase. A phrase is not a complete sentence, it can be part of a sentence. So it can be a collection of few words maybe. So that defines a phrase. So it does not tell us much about what this what the author is trying to mean by that small phrase. A phrase is essentially, or it's specifically, it's an incomplete sentence, or it constitutes of several words. Now an expression in a programming language is somewhat like a phrase in English. So suppose you want to do a computation, or you want to do a calculation that will print out 4 on the screen. Now you want to do something like 2 plus 2, and then you want to print that 2 plus 2 in this part inside this string. So how do we do that?